Mr. President, I came for the purpose of asking unanimous consent with regard to Zika. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of H.R. 5243, which is at the desk, that after the enacting clause be stricken, that the substitute amendment, which is the text of the Blunt-Murray amendment to provide $1.1 billion in funding for Zika, be agreed to, that there be up to 1 hour of debate equally divided between the two leaders or their designees, that upon the use of or yielding back of time, the bill as amended be read a third time and the Senate vote on passage of the bill as amended with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
The Majority Leader.
Let me just walk through this one more time in case anybody's confused about where we are. As I said yesterday, Republican senators are eager to pass the conference report, which is before us, and send it to the President's desk for signature. We should do that today, this very day. That would accomplish several important things before we leave for the week. First, it would provide $1.1 billion in immediate funding to combat Zika. That's the exact amount of money in the Democrats' request. However, the Democrats' request includes only funding for Zika and leaves the rest of the important priorities behind. The conference report that the House passed includes full funding for Zika, funding for military construction, funding for veterans programs, and temporary but meaningful reforms to ensure that we're able to combat mosquito-borne illnesses during the summer months, which are upon us. So we should pass the conference report today, this very day. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of the conference report to accompany H.R. 2577 and the conference report be agreed to with no intervening action or debate.
Mr. President.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
A senator from Florida.
Mr. President, first of all, did I hear the objection from the Majority Leader to my unanimous consent request?
The Majority Leader has not yet objected.
Okay.
Mr. President, I believe I reserved the right to object and then offered an alternative consent to which I think the senator from Florida is about to respond.
Okay. Mr. President, reserving the right to object. Now, here we are in the same old political games with a much-needed bill, Milcon VA, a very good bill, attaching a Zika bill that is loaded down with poison pills that takes away the family planning funds and also takes money out of the Affordable Care Act. So here again, it's the same political games, and for that reason, I object.
Objection is heard to the Majority Leader's request.
Now, Mr. President.
Is there objection to the request from the senator from Florida?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, and I will be objecting. Let me just say to my good friend from Florida that regardless of the substantive arguments that he's making, as a practical matter, if we were to repass the Senate bill, it would not pass the House. So it would not achieve the result that we're looking for. So I guess who's playing political games is in the eye of the beholder. But if we want to get an outcome, we want to get $1.1 billion appropriated to combat Zika and do it now, and we want to fund the military construction bill, the proposal that the senator from Florida has asked will not achieve that. Therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
I would just say to the Majority Leader that one of the things that the funds in your proposal takes is money from Puerto Rico, and that island, by seeing the unanimous vote that we had, not unanimous, overwhelming vote that we had last week for a financial assistance plan to help Puerto Rico get out of their financial woes. Well, part of those financial woes is in the healthcare sector. And we know that experts have told us that 20% of the population of Puerto Rico is estimated at the end of this summer to be infected with the Zika virus. So there's just one example of why we should not take an approach that is taking money out not only of the Affordable Care Act and taking money away from family planning, but specifically with regard to its effect upon Puerto Rico. Now, I represent the state that, as I shared with the Senate last week, that we had 11 new cases of the Zika virus last week. Well, lo and behold, we now have 13 more new cases, bringing a total in our state to 276, which includes 43 pregnant women. And that's just one of the 50 states in the union, not including the territories. The number of cases being reported across the country continues to rise. There have been 7 infants born in the U.S. with the Zika-related birth defects. And you know what I'm talking about because you've seen the pictures of how when the virus attacks the fetus in its development, it does not allow the development properly of the head and of the brain. And the CDC right now in America is monitoring 599 pregnant women. The public health experts estimate that caring for a child born with the Zika-related microcephaly, it could amount to $10 million in medical cost over that child's lifetime. Now, that's just speaking about the dollars. That's not talking about the tragedy. And by that estimate, it would cost up to $2 billion to care for 200 children born with microcephaly. That's $100 million more than what this senator and the minority leader had asked for in the first place, reflecting the president's request of $1.9 billion that the experts say is needed to curb the spread of the virus. And that request was made 4 months ago, and we still haven't done anything about it. So at what point does the majority and the majority leader decide to stop playing these games and simply do what is needed?
Mr. President, would my friend yield for a question?
Of course.
Is it true that your family first came to Florida in 1829 or a long time ago? Is that right?
Can the senator ask that again?
Yes.
I cannot hear.
Is it true that your family came to Florida right after the turn of the 19th century?
Mr. President, through you, I would answer the senator, yes. My family came to Florida right after Florida was acquired as a territory from Spain. Yes.
And it's true that during your lifetime, you've served in various elective offices in the state of Florida. You were, as I recall, state treasurer, which included insurance commissioner. You represent the state of Florida in the House of Representatives. Is that right? Is that true?
Mr. President, that is true.
And you've been in this body since 2000. Is that true?
15 and a half years. That is true.
And is it also true that during your tenure as a Floridian, you had the good fortune to be an American astronaut?
Not only the good fortune, but the great privilege, and now I have that opportunity to work on the policy for the nation's space program.
The point I'm trying to outline here for the senator from Florida, I think without any stretch of the imagination, that you know the state of Florida pretty well, don't you?
The good Lord willing, I know it pretty much like the back of my hand.
And you understand as much, if not more than anyone else, the dangers of these mosquitoes who are causing and ravaging your state and other states, and of course, the citizens, American citizens of Puerto Rico. Is that true?
Yes, sir, and I know that mosquitoes are all over Florida, but now this one strain of mosquito, the Egypti, it feeds for dinner not on one human, but 4. Each of those 4, if it has the Zika virus, are now infected after it's had its dinner.
And you understand, I ask the senator from Florida, that mosquitoes for generations of time have caused all kinds of medical problems for people that are infected with different bites of the mosquito. Is that right?
Mosquitoes, if you think of the building of the Panama Canal, they transmitted the malaria. So mosquitoes are a vector in which to transmit a lot of diseases. And this strain of mosquito can lay its larva in a piece of stagnant water as small as a bottle cap full of water.
And it's true, is it not, that in generations past, the mosquitoes have caused death and illness that we've tried to handle for the last 100 years. Is that true?
That is correct. And we usually meet those emergencies with emergency funding.
And isn't it true that this strain of mosquito is now causing, for the first time in the history of that we know, causing not only death and sickness, but also women giving birth to babies who are very, very ill?
There is a direct link, I would say, Mr. President, in response to the senator, a direct link with a pregnant woman being infected with the Zika virus and the probabilities that she will deliver a child that is deformed.
The senator is aware that what we passed out of here by 89 votes was $1.1 billion to give emergency funding to the state of Florida and the rest of our states, and of course the citizens of Puerto Rico. You're aware we did that.
Not only that, but wide bipartisan support early on in this whole dialogue. And now we're seeing the resistance of the majority leader to take up the very bill that passed with those overwhelming numbers of bipartisan support.
And the senator is aware that what we got back from the House of Representatives that this Republican Senate signed on to is a bill that is an abomination. It does, among other things, allow the flying of Confederate flags on our cemeteries. You're aware that it takes $543 million from Obamacare. You're aware, are you not, that it takes money from the emergencies we have today with Ebola. The senator is aware that they have taken a whack at the Clean Water Act with our inability to spray. The senator is aware that they have, where so many women go to Planned Parenthood to handle their problems that women have, including they want help in not getting pregnant? Are you aware that the legislation they sent back to us prevents Planned Parenthood from being involved in this?
It is a political message that is so reviled by the people of America. They want us to get down to the business. If Senator McConnell had a flood or an earthquake in Kentucky, we would all support him with emergency funding to meet that emergency. We have an emergency now, and why are they adding all of these poison pills like the Democratic leader has just enumerated are in this bill? Well, Mr. President, I think the senator from Nevada has, with his cross-examination, exposed exactly what is the problem here, and it's too bad. The clock continues to tick. The end of this week, we will go out. We won't come back until the day after Labor Day. That's the first week of September. And all along, the government of the United States is going to have to figure out how it gets the money to local mosquito control districts, how it gets the money to the drug companies to continue the R&D to find and produce a vaccine, and all the other health-related expenses.
Yield through the chair for a question, please.
I certainly do, to my friend from Illinois.
I'd like to ask through the chair, the senator from Florida, is it true that it's been 5 months since President Obama declared this public health emergency and asked the Congress to respond to that emergency in a timely way? He asked for emergency funding of $1.9 billion for mosquito abatement, for medical research, for expanding lab facilities, and investing in developing a vaccine to protect Americans, if not this year, next year?
It is true, and not only is it true that the president requested it, but immediately a whole bunch of us out here filed the bill and brought it to the attention of the Senate, and it is now 5 months later.
Through the chair, if you're dealing with a public health emergency, a public health crisis, the potential of an epidemic that we now think could infect 25% of the population of Puerto Rico, is a timely response an important part of the congressional response?
Amen to that. And here we are dithering with these political games. We wonder, why is the American public so turned off when they see what's going on up here? And here's one of the very best examples for an emergency.
I asked the senator, and I see my colleague, Senator Murray of Washington, on the floor, who is in a very important position. I believe she's going to address this issue herself in a few moments. But is it not true that we worked out a bipartisan compromise in the Senate, not to give $1.9 billion, which on the Democratic side is our aspiration, but at least to agree with the Republicans in the Senate for $1.1 billion to respond to the president's request for an emergency response, and that we passed the bill in the Senate with 89 votes, an overwhelming bipartisan vote, with an agreement and a compromise in May, that this was sent over to the House of Representatives in May of this year?
Not only is it true, but when something passes out of 100 senators with 89 votes, that's a pretty strong consensus.
I'd ask the senator through the chair. So we have the president identifying a public health emergency, the president telling us, and the CDC as well, that delaying this makes the possibility or probability of an epidemic even worse. We have a response by the Senate on a bipartisan basis with 89 votes to provide over $1 billion to the president to get to work, to protect America, and to develop a vaccine. And is it not true then that the House was given this measure with 89 votes and failed to send it back to us on a timely basis?
Not only is that true, those four things but then they put in the House of Representatives on a very good bill, Milcon VA, appropriations, and they send it down here thinking that we're going to have to take it at the 11th hour with all of those poison pills, which includes the Confederate flag.
I asked the senator from Florida through the chair, is it also true the bill sent to us by the House, after we'd passed a bipartisan bill with 89 votes, the bill sent to us by the House had no Democratic signatories, no senators or House members of the Democratic Party signing on to this conference report, which was sent over to us? So it was a totally Republican conference report?
Not only is that true, but it is also an indicative of how ideologically driven and how partisan driven so much of the activity here in this U.S. Capitol building is, which is what is very distasteful to the American people.
I'd ask the senator from Florida through the chair, is it also not true, based on the statements made by the Republican Majority Leader, Senator McConnell of Kentucky, that he's going to give us one last chance in the next 48 hours to either take this partisan version of the bill addressing this public health crisis or do nothing for the next 7 weeks?
And that, of course, I say to the senator from Illinois, is such a poor, poor choice.
I'd ask the senator from Florida my last question. I know my other colleagues are waiting to ask this question. Your state, the state of Florida, appears to be vulnerable, more vulnerable than most states, because of your proximity to Puerto Rico and other places and the number of travelers coming into the state of Florida from areas where we know for certain that the Zika virus is starting to be manifest. I asked the senator from Florida, what are you hearing back in your state about the need for a timely bipartisan effort in Congress to deal with the public health crisis of the Zika virus?
I say to the senator from Illinois, with 276 cases of infection, with 43 pregnant women that we know of just in the state of Florida, is it any wonder that 5 months ago, when we filed the $1.9 billion request of the administration, that my colleague from Florida, my friend who I get along with, the junior senator, Senator Rubio, co-sponsored the bill with me?
Well, I said it was the last question. I'll ask one more if I might. Through the chair, I would ask the senator from Florida. So if you have Senator Rubio, a well-known Republican from Florida, and Senator Bill Nelson, maybe the best-known Democrat from Florida, agreeing that this is an emergency that needs to be dealt with on a timely basis, that the president's request for $1.9 billion is a reasonable request, that we pass a bipartisan measure, Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans, that we are moving towards solving this problem, responding to it. Is it not true that this measure fell apart, broke down, when it ended up in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, where they did not take a bipartisan approach to the issue?
Not only is that true, I say to the senator, but the fact that this is an emergency that is always dealt with in the history of this United States Senate as a bipartisan thing to meet the situation of the emergency. And now this has been used because it is so urgent to get the appropriations to be a political message, ideological, partisan-driven bill.
Senator.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.